This occurred last summer. At that time, I was 13. I wish it hadn't happened. But I can't get rid of the memories of those horrific and shocking events. One night, my mom got a call about her father's death. We were all shocked because Grandpa hadn't been sick. My mom and brother rushed over that night since he lived 4 hours away. Dad and I left the next morning. When we arrived, Mom told us Grandpa died from a severe head injury. It felt eerie being in his house without him. Planning the funeral felt surreal, and I couldn't wrap my head around Grandpa being gone. Mom's an only child, so everything was left to her in his will. After the funeral, we returned home. I had never seen her so sad. She was very close to her father, especially after her mother passed away suddenly when she was young. Grandpa had always taken good care of her. Mom decided to stay at Grandpa's house for a few days and asked me to go with her since Dad and my brother were busy with work. I didn't want her to be alone. When we got to Grandpa's house, everything was in its place, and it still smelled like him. Mom didn't want to change anything. She wanted the house to stay the same. I asked if I could explore the basement since it was the only place I had never been to. It had always been locked. We searched for the keys, but couldn't find them. It was odd that Grandpa kept it locked while living alone. Curiosity got the best of us, and we broke the lock. The basement smelled awful, like it hadn't been aired out in years. There wasn't much down there, except for some very old videotapes. I asked Mom about them, and she said they might be from her childhood. I checked the labels, and she was right, but there were 2 tapes with no labels, just a red dot. I hid the tapes from Mom and took them with me. I waited until we returned home to see what was on the tapes. In my room, I played the first tape. It was filmed in the living room, but everything was dark. The video was eerie. Neither Grandpa nor Grandma were visible. Mom called me, so I quickly turned it off. I waited until everyone was asleep to continue watching. 5 minutes in, no one appeared. Then Grandma showed up, holding a candlestick and wearing scary black clothes. Grandpa appeared next, dressed the same way. I was nervous as I watched them perform what seemed like satanic rituals. I stopped the tape to collect myself. Grandpa looked terrifying and dark, unlike the loving man I knew. I turned off the tape and tried to sleep, but couldn't. As dawn approached, I finally fell asleep, but had a terrifying dream. I was in Grandpa's living room, watching my grandparents perform the rituals. Suddenly, another person, dressed like them, approached me. I screamed and woke up, drenched in sweat. I felt compelled to finish watching the tape to understand what was happening. I continued and saw my grandparents performing strange, terrifying rituals involving blood, animal remains, and a mysterious figure, possibly a girl whose face was unclear. They drank the blood while chanting ominously, and the tape ended. The entire scene horrified me. I began to wonder if the girl in the rituals was my mom or someone else. In the morning, Mom looked at me with an expressionless face. Days passed, and I felt like watching the tape had summoned something demonic into our home. My relationship with Mom grew colder, and I felt scared of her. Sometimes, while sleeping, I felt like someone was sleeping next to me. One night, I woke up to the smell of Grandpa. I no longer felt comfortable sleeping at night as nightmares plagued me constantly. A year passed, and I still felt afraid. I hadn't told Mom, but I sensed that she knew. I had discovered something. I wondered whether I should tell her or keep it a secret. Life grew increasingly tense. I couldn't escape the feeling that something dark and sinister had been unleashed. Every shadow seemed to move, and every creak in the house sounded like a whisper, calling my name. My dreams continued to haunt me, each one more vivid and terrifying than the last. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, I heard soft footsteps outside my door. My heart raced as I listened to the sound growing closer. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was just my imagination. The door creaked open, and I felt a cold breeze wash over me. I opened my eyes to see a dark figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was Grandpa, or at least something that looked like him. His eyes were hollow, and his mouth twisted into a sinister grin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure leaned closer, whispering in a voice that sounded like a mix of my grandparents' voices. Then it vanished. I never watched the second tape. I buried it in the backyard, hoping to bury the nightmares with it. But deep down, I knew that some things can't be undone. The house still felt haunted, and the shadows seemed to grow darker with each passing day. I often wondered if the rituals had bound our family to something sinister, something that would never let us go. My best friend was always into the unknown and the mysterious, with an intense fascination for horror. He was obsessed with movies and series about demons and spirits. He was an extreme fan of that kind of stuff. I remember a weekend was approaching, and he suggested that we binge, watch horror movies with a deep psychological twist. But honestly, I'm not a fan of that kind of content. I'm too much of a coward for those things. But he was relentless, always looking for scarier stuff whenever he had the chance. It was like an obsession for him. When that weekend ended, we met up as usual to talk about how our weekends had gone. During that conversation, he told me that psychological horror movies no longer seemed entertaining to him, meaning he needed something stronger. My friend talked about trying something, about experiencing a sensation more intense than what the movies and series were giving him. So I asked, "What are you talking about? What do you want to try?" And he said, "I want to try the pentagram in the dark." I blurted out, "The what?" And he repeated, "The pentagram in the dark." I didn't quite understand what the pentagram in the dark was, but he explained to me that it involved drawing a perfect pentagram on the floor, positioning oneself in the center of it in complete darkness, where you can't see anything, and invoking the name of a demon. I told him he was crazy to try something like that, and that it was very dangerous. But he just shrugged and said that nothing was going to happen, and that he would try it the following weekend because he wanted to feel a sensation that horror movies were no longer giving him, to feel a stronger emotion. My friend went ahead with his plan to try the pentagram in the dark, though he didn't tell me which demon he would invoke. The only thing I can tell you is that my friend, after trying that insane idea, was never the same. He started having nightmares about something sinister and very dark, something that wouldn't leave him alone, to the point where he had a breakdown and later fell into a deep coma, where the doctors had no hope he would wake up. The night he performed the ritual, something changed in him. He became distant, his eyes hollow and his smile twisted. He confided in me about the voices he heard, the shadows he saw moving in the corners of his room. He told me about the feeling of being watched, even when he was alone. It wasn't long before he started seeing things during the day, too. Dark figures following him, whispering his name. His obsession had turned into a living nightmare. He tried to seek help, but no one believed him. They thought it was just his overactive imagination or the result of watching too many horror movies. But I knew my friend, and I knew that something was seriously wrong. One night, he called me in a panic, his voice trembling. He said the demon he had invoked was real, and it was coming for him. I rushed over to his place, but it was too late. I found him lying on the floor, eyes wide open in terror, muttering incomprehensible words. From that day on, he was never the same. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't function. He was consumed by the darkness he had invited into his life. Eventually, he slipped into a coma, his mind shattered by the horrors he had experienced. The doctors couldn't explain it. They had never seen anything like it before. I don't know if that sinister thing he attracted with that crazy idea of the pentagram in the dark had to do with my friend's fate. But what I can say is that my friend ended up being disconnected from reality. It seems that thing defeated him. All because of that absurd idea of playing with what shouldn't be played with, and what you don't fully understand. I lost my best friend to his obsession with horror and his desire to seek beyond. Let this serve as a lesson. And I hope no one tries the pentagram in the dark, because it is something delicate, and you should never play with things. You shouldn't. If you value your sanity, stay away from the dark. Stay away from the unknown, because you never know what might be lurking there, waiting for someone foolish enough to call it forth. Hello, my name is Joseph. I'm 19 years old. I still can't forget this day. When I was 12 years old, I went to my aunt's house because my parents had to go to my Uncle Emmanuel's bachelor party. When I arrived at my aunt's house, I approached the door, and my aunt opened it. It seemed strange because I hadn't knocked. I went in, and she guided me to my cousin's room. Everything was purple and pastel pink. You know those super high beds with a mattress underneath? Well, that's where I slept. I should note that this house was super religious, and I had really long hair, and wasn't sure if I believed in God or not. I had a feeling that my aunt didn't like me because of that. Honestly, I didn't care. We spent time gossiping and eating. My aunt came to inform me that my cousin had to go to her best friend's birthday party, and that I would be alone in that room. We were sad for a moment, but then she left, and it passed. Night came, and my aunt left a letter on my pillow. It had a lot of rules, which I'll tell you now. Hello, Joseph. I hope you have a nice night. Here are some rules you must follow. 1. If you wake up in the night and see a lump on the top bed, run to the closet and hide among the clothes. That's not your cousin. 2. Never leave the room after 2:30 a.m. 3. If you hear me get up and come to your room, pretend to be asleep. 4. And most importantly, leave the nightlight on next to the ballerina machine. Sweet dreams, dear Joseph. How did she expect me to have a good time knowing there are evil things here? Anyway, I went to bed. I woke up at 1:20 a.m. and heard my aunt get up. I pretended to be asleep. She came into the room and started shaking me and shouting my name until her voice seemed to disappear. After that, I saw the ballerina machine turn off. I turned it back on and noticed a lump on the bed. I quickly got out of bed, ran to the closet, and hid among the closet, and hid among the clothes. I heard that thing get out of bed and start searching everywhere. It looked in the closet, but didn't see me because of the clothes. I spent the whole night in the closet and couldn't see anything. I turned on my phone and shone a light on the letter my aunt left. There was a 5th rule I had missed. Don't go to the bathroom. He's there. I got scared and never dared to go to that bathroom. I fell back asleep and woke up at 9:30 a.m. My cousin had returned from her sleepover, and I tried to scare her. She got scared and then started laughing with me at how she fell for a tasteless joke. She asked if I had a good time. I told her everything, and she said, "Hey, but my mom left with me. You were only with my brother." I was shocked and scared. I told her to stop joking, that her mom had left me a letter and everything. Then she said, "Get out of here now." I didn't understand anything, So I left the house, and my cousin texted me, "Sorry for kicking you out, but it's really not safe here for you, I suppose." I asked for explanations while my parents were on their way, worried because I had told them everything. She said, "When they leave letters, it's to find you easily. You survived. But I don't know who left you the letter, and my brother cannot write." To this day, I'm still afraid of my aunt, and I never visited her again. I think the worst thing that could happen to a girl is to be alone on the streets at night. I was 16 when it happened. Now, at 25, the memory still sends chills down my spine. It was the night of my friend's birthday party, and I had stayed out a bit too late. The subway ride home was uneventful, but feeling adventurous, I decided to take an alternate bus route, a choice I'd come to regret. Getting off the bus, the streets were eerily quiet. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the night air biting at my skin. The usual route was just a straight shot home, but I had to walk a few blocks from the stop. It was then that I first noticed it. A white panel van creeping along the street, almost in sync with my steps. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but as I turned onto my street, the van did too. My heart started to race. I quickened my pace, my eyes darting around for anyone, anything that could help. The van followed me, turning into my driveway. Fear gnawed at my insides. I veered off the driveway and onto the path leading to the nearby ice rink. The bright lights of the rink offered a small comfort, but it wasn't enough to shake the terror settling in my bones. The van caught up to me, and an older man leaned out the window, his face partially hidden in the shadows. "Hey, you need a ride," he called out, his voice dripping with false friendliness. I shook my head vigorously, backing away. Just then, an SUV pulled into the driveway, causing the van to lurch forward and stop at the end. The SUV drove off, and I thought I was safe for a moment. But then the van circled back. My legs felt like they were made of lead. But I kept moving. I was almost at the door to my building when another car appeared. The van did the same dance, driving away and circling back. I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Suddenly, a woman in a black car pulled up beside me. She must have seen the fear in my eyes because she rolled down her window and asked if I was okay. I told her about the van, my voice trembling. "Get in, I'll drive you to the end of the driveway," she said. "I'll wait there while you run inside." Without hesitation, I jumped in. She drove me just far enough, and I bolted from the car to the building's lobby, my heart pounding in my chest. I slammed the door behind me and ran up to my apartment, locking every possible lock. I called the cops, my hands shaking as I dialed. While I was on the phone, I peeked out the window and saw the van circling the building. It was like something out of a horror movie. The police arrived quickly, sweeping the area, but the van was gone. A week passed before I heard anything. The police showed me a photo from the building's security camera. It was the man from the van. They told me he was found and put on the sex offender list. Somehow, I wasn't convinced. Maybe it was the lingering fear, or the fact that I never saw him in cuffs. Now, every time I see a white panel van, my stomach churns. I hope to God I never see that man again. Even now, years later, the thought of that night haunts me. I'm just grateful I made it home, and for the kindness of a stranger who helped me when I needed it most. This story is real based on my experience. I was 11 years old at the time. One quiet night at home. There were no sounds coming from the kitchen or anything like that. I was comfortably watching videos in my room when I heard a call. It was my mother asking me to keep an eye on the washing machine while she went to my godmother's house to get some things. It was 11 p.m. What could be so important to leave the house at that hour? I don't know. Apparently, it was some tablecloths or something she was sent. Anyway, that doesn't matter. I told her, yes, no problem. I'd keep an eye on the laundry. She said goodbye, saying she wouldn't be long. I gestured that I'd be fine, and she left. Time passed, and my parents still hadn't come back. I was a bit uneasy because I've always been scared of the patio. It's dark and creepy, even more so now that I was alone. My brother was in his room watching TV, and there was no way he'd leave what he was doing to keep me company. I couldn't do anything because the washing machine was in the patio, and I had to go there. I had promised my mom I'd keep an eye on it. A few more hours passed, and my parents still hadn't come back. But I was calmer because the laundry was almost done, and I could finally stay inside without going out to the patio. Well, I got thirsty and decided to go inside for a moment to get some water and come back out. I told myself I'd be back in 5 minutes. As I entered the house, I heard some sounds that made me turn around. When I turned, I saw a woman dressed in white with long black hair. I got extremely scared. I was terrified. I tried to look at her face, but it was blurry. Since that attempt failed, I looked down and noticed her feet were floating. I was stunned. I couldn't move. While all this was happening, I heard a voice speaking to me, trying to tell me something, but it was in a strange language I had never heard before. When I could move, I desperately ran to my brother's room. He asked me what had happened and why I was so pale. I couldn't say anything. I sat in a chair to wait for the shock to pass. I wondered to myself what was happening, and if it was a product of my imagination, but it felt too real. Everything was real. Why did she appear to me? What did she want to tell me? I don't know. I was too scared of seeing her again, or encountering her once more. So I was left with those questions. After a while, my mother came back. I told her what had happened, and she told me that when I was little, my father found me in the living room playing with dolls with a girl in a white dress and black hair. My father, scared, looked again, and she was gone. My current self still has many questions. Who was she? Was she the same being my father saw back then? What did she want? I don't know. Since then, I haven't seen her again, and I definitely don't stay out in the patio late at night.